has several policies to go over this evening, so we will turn it over to Dr. Jenkins to introduce her staff.
Thank you, Chairwoman. We will start with some of our food and nutrition policies being revised. I'm looking at Laura Gilbert, who's kicking off. Go.
Oh, it's not coming up. There it goes.
Just press the right button here.
Good afternoon. We are presenting some policies. Can you go one more? The purpose of these revisions and/or creation of these policies are to provide a uniform and systematic method for procurement, assure compliance with all applicable federal, state laws, Florida State Board of Education rules, board policies, administrative rules, procedures, and guidelines, promote transparency and accountability in the expenditure of public funds and the use of public resources. This is our tentative schedule. We did already go before Cabinet on September 25th. We are here today for the Rule Development Workshop on the 17th, and it will go up for board approval on November 7th and become effective upon approval.
The first policy that we're going to review is EF, Foodservice Management. Basically, EF is being revised to incorporate language from other policies so that we don't have to have as many policies. And the summary is going to take the existing policy language to include content, formatting, and terminology edits. So in EF, we are changing the name of Food Services Management to Food Service. We are changing the policy to follow USDA regulations, which have changed to 30 minutes for food sales after the last lunch. And language is being added in effort to take 2 or 3 other policies out and include them into EF. So in keeping with the current language, the responsibilities of the food service is including the funding, the purchasing new equipment, the preparation of new facility, and that should be plans, establishment of meal prices, and that will take out EFD policy. It also looks at the responsibilities of the principal, and that is to include the efficiency of the dining area, minimal amount of time students have to eat, and providing breakfast to students who may be late for school. The language that is being added is from EFAB, which was labeled as government commodities and now is going to be properly titled food allergies, and we'll bring that back to the board. And we've updated the references to the Florida statutes. Policy EFC, the purpose is to include the following: the compliance with the USDA guidelines on free and reduced meals, simplify language throughout the policy, establish reasonable efforts to collect unpaid meal balances, and establish the availability of summer meals. EFC is also being reformatted to include titles and subsections. So basically, the revisions have been made to the existing policy language to include the content formatting and terminology edits and consistent with statutory language. The free and reduced responsibility used to be with the principal, but we're updating that now so that it is the responsibility of the Food Services Program with approval by the Florida Department of Agriculture. We're simply changing the fact that the superintendent will publicly announce the standards into the superintendent or designee. And third, all students will receive a full meal regardless. Am I in the right one? Oh. They're on all students. There we go. All students will receive a full meal regardless of available funds in their account, and FNS and Teaching and Learning will address the action and develop the support for the negative balances. Summer meals are available at no charge in designated schools during the summertime. And then in terms of the action, a student is eligible for the free or reduced price meals. Actually, what we're removing is the new language states the children eligible for a free or reduced price meal will have access to all meals. And the update according to the Florida statutes and the eligibility guidelines. EFCA primarily establishes the creation of a universal breakfast program, and we're incorporating this into the policy EF to eliminate the duplication of the breakfast policies. EFD is the policy on food prices, and this was included in EF so that we did not duplicate the policy again. EFH is the food sanitation program. This was updated so that we have the existing policy language to include the content formatting and the terminology edits consistent with statutory language. So in the food service sanitation program, we're calling it sanitation. We're outlining it according to a hazard analysis and critical control points for food safety, and it's being incorporated as required by the National School Lunch Act. The incorporated responsibilities of the food service manager are required under the USDA guidelines and the National School Lunch Act. In addition, the EFH food sanitation program will update all the references to the Florida statutes, the Florida Administrative Code, USDA requirements, and the National School Lunch Act.
Good afternoon. The policy that I am updating is IHAMA, which is currently titled Teaching About Drugs, Alcohol, and Tobacco. The purpose of this is to update the policy. This policy sets guidelines for what age-appropriate prevention instruction will be provided to students. The revisions have been made to the existing policy language to include content formatting and terminology edits consistent with statutory language. Right now, the current policy title is Teaching About Drugs, Alcohol, and Tobacco. We're changing that to Teaching About Substance Use and Abuse, which is consistent with statutory language. And we also are changing some descriptions. Right now, there's some outdated description of substance abuse curriculum. We are changing the description of what should be taught to include statutory language regarding the misuse of alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana, adding a more up-to-date description of over-the-counter prescription and illegal drugs.
Good afternoon. My policy is IHBEB, Primary Home Language Survey. The purpose is to update the Primary Home Language Survey policy, and the revisions have been made to the existing policy name, language to include content from the Florida DOE rule, and change of procedure for documentation. Our current policy currently it states Primary Home Language Survey. The change is to name it Home Language Survey, so it matches also the consent decree. And then documentation currently in the policies it will be forwarded to the school principal and superintendent file in the CUNE folder. The change is that this information is provided to the school's ESOL contact and file as part of the student's ELL plan. Also add language that includes the 3 specific home language survey questions.
The next policy is IHBG, Home Education and Home Instruction. And there were no changes to this policy other than the revision so that it can be updated from 1993 to 2017. Everything else in that policy was still the same and appropriate. The next policy is ILB, Standardized Test Administration. The purpose is to update the language describing standardized testing, updates and revisions to language describing test security. And the revisions have been made to the existing policy to include content, formatting, and terminology edits consistent with statutory language. The first issue is the non-discrimination language. It did not include gender identity and sexual orientation, so we have now included that to be consistent with our other policies. It did not include the option to designate multiple coordinators, so we have now added the option to designate multiple testing coordinators as statewide assessments, so more people in each school can assist with test administration. It did not specify a requirement for the receipt of training on how to administer tests. Now there is an additional requirement for the acknowledgement of the receipt of training, so we can assure that our staff have been properly trained in test administration. The old policy did not specify that the test coordinator was also responsible for informing and executing test security practices. So we added the test coordinator in this section so that they could be in charge of security. Lastly, it did describe our tests as nationally normed, and we have removed that description because some of our tests are nationally normed and some of our tests are not nationally normed, so we took that out.
Good afternoon. I have policy IJ, instructional resources and materials. We conform the policy with new legislation that was adopted during the 2017 legislative session. The revisions have been made to the existing policy language to include legislative updates, content, formatting, terminology edits consistent with statutory language. The first change was who can object to the instructional materials being adopted, and it was added that a resident to the individuals that may object the instructional materials adopted by the board, and they define that resident as anybody that lives in Orange County. It does not, the previous policy did not include a requirement for a hearing officer. The new process had been modified to include a hearing before an unbiased qualified hearing officer. Revisions to what the public may present during the public hearing. We allowed the parents or the resident objecting to the instructional materials to proffer evidence that, one, the material does not meet the state criteria for instructional materials, or two, the materials are pornographic or prohibited by statute. There was language changes that require the board now to maintain a current list of instructional materials on its website by grade level, which we currently already do. For the digital curriculum portion of the policy, there is no longer a 50% requirement of the materials to be digital. And then we changed the statutory reference to reflect the current Florida statutes.
The next steps would be training for internal OCPS employees regarding revisions to policy and new procedures, continue the training for internal OCPS employees regarding policies and procedures, revisions to the internal procedures, and review of requirements outlined in statute. And that is all we have.
Chair.
All right, has anybody from the public come to provide us any testimony with regard to any of the proposed board policy revisions that have been given to us? Seeing none, board members, any questions or comments? Okay. It's like a suspense movie. Thank you all, seriously. I know it's drudgery and a lot of hard work going through these, so we appreciate it, and we really do, and it's something that needs to be done, and you know, it's not the most scintillating meetings or work for you all, but we appreciate it. Dr. Jenkins, anything else for the good of the order?
For the good of the order, these will come before the board at the November 7th meeting, Chairman, members of the board. And certainly commendations to both staff members and to our legal team for shepherding through. We will have all of our policies updated by the end of this school year.
Terrific.
All right.
Terrific. All right. Thanks. Everybody have a good evening. We're adjourned.